Hello and welcome to this, our first in we hope to be a series of events on and around the subject of critical librarianship. My name is Alex. I'm the Students and New Professionals Officer for cilip.London Regional Group. We're welcoming today our speaker, Kat Halliday, who is an academic support librarian at the University of Warwick Business School. Our speaker today is talking on the subject of decolonisation and diversity of sources in librarianship. This has, of course, been a very popular subject, and a lot of people emailing saying that they're interested to hear more about this. So this will provide sort of an introductory foundation to the topic, as well as some practical examples of how it could be applied in librarianship. There are some challenging topics surrounding this subject, so if you would like to ask a question anonymously, you can do so using the Padlet, which has been circulated in the emails and will also be put in the chat for you to use. However, you can also use the chat function on the Zoom call to ask questions as well. Well, that's all from me, so I'll pass over to you, Kat, and just a reminder if everyone could keep themselves on mute throughout the call.
Hello everyone, I am Kat Halliday and I am an academic support librarian at the University of Warwick, previously working within social sciences, but currently now with the business school. I want to start by being very, very honest. I am not an expert in decolonising in any way, shape or form. I'm just an interested party. When I was asked to do this talk, it was a small talk to possibly a select few people, and it has turned out to be quite a lot of people, so I'm incredibly nervous, so I will try and control my nerves during this session. So I will share a presentation with you. I will make sure that it's available because it has some links within it after the session. There is a video in it, which I had to slightly change today. Unfortunately, PowerPoint will only now accept YouTube videos and a very select proportion of videos, so I had to kind of do a screen grab and put it into the presentation as that instead, but I will provide the link to the actual live video there. So yeah, I'm just going to share my screen. And I'll start at the beginning. So I've already explained who I am. My pronouns are she, her. I went to the University of Sheffield High School and I, what's the word? Qualified, I guess is the right word, in 2011. It was a wonderful experience and I've been kind of practicing in different kind of subject areas. I've been a health librarian, worked for the NHS. I've worked as a legal librarian and I've also mainly worked in academic libraries. So this kind of has more of an academic libraries focus than any other sector. So house rules, I've borrowed this as a very, very long reference here, but I've been to quite a few sessions and this always struck me as kind of like the best way of kind of describing how I'd like the session to be run and how we interact with each other. So it's going to be a brave space. The whole point of providing the Padlet is that you can ask questions without having to kind of attribute who they are. So please do feel free to use the Padlet. I'll kind of use that as the basis for the Q&A at the end. You know, it is a difficult topic to talk about. I'm not an expert. I'm just going to describe it as I describe it. So there is no upset intended if I say something that somebody possibly questions, but that's the whole point of this, is that we have an open and honest discussion and dialogue about this particular topic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, how I came into kind of understanding decolonising, why it's important to me, why I found it interesting. I arrived at Warwick 3 years ago and we have a really rare ethnicity and migration collection, which was bequeathed to us by Sivanandan, who is a Malaysian writer who had a lot to do with the Institute for Race Relations, is really, really well known in kind of the race relations field. We were bequeathed from his family, the library. So there's pamphlets, there's books, there's zines, magazines of really, really small kind of intimate groups, all about kind of race relations from the 70s through to kind of present day, really. So that was why I kind of had to upskill as part of my job of looking after history and sociology, was that I would look after this particular collection. So for me, it was a really new area. I'm not trained. I didn't do politics as a degree. I'm actually a musician by trade. So for me, I kind of had to learn a really new skill set. And when I started at Warwick was around 2018. It was around the time that quite a lot of the decolonising queries were coming through from students. There was a lot of kind of chatter amongst the SUs about kind of decolonising, what a decolonising university looks like, how the library should fit into that. So for me, this is where I started my journey. I had to upskill really, really quickly, and I found it quite challenging to find sources of information that would give me kind of a really basic grounding in what they were and how that would apply to libraries as well. I also had a great deal of fear. As a white woman, I'm going to stand here and, you know, acknowledge my privilege of being a cis middle-class white woman. I was very afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, appearing as though I wasn't an expert. I'd never want to offend anyone, and I found it really difficult to feel like I might speak for a group that I wasn't part of. And part of this was kind of like learning how to acknowledge my privilege. And I think I'm going to show a little video in a minute who much more eloquently than I ever will discusses privilege and the different types of privilege. You know, there's a white privilege, which is probably the most common one that we're going to talk about that's relevant. We've got a gender privilege, we've got kind of a sexuality privilege, we've got socioeconomic, and then kind of me being able-bodied. I have all of these privileges which interlink. And all of these things kind of like interplay with how I do my job. So I have a part of my job is to teach, but also part of my job is collection development. So how do all of my kind of lived experiences and histories and kind of I've forgotten the word now. There's a course on it, bias. There we go. All these biases come into play. So how do I address them? How do I unpick them? You know, there's all of these things that are kind of going around in my mind. Where does this all come from? So I'm going to hopefully try and play this video where John talks more eloquently than I ever will about privilege.
We've been engaged in a global conversation about race and racism. You've probably had discussions at home, at school, or at work, and in those conversations, you've probably heard the term white privilege. You may have even had this term used in a way that felt like an insult or an accusation. Others will have told you that it's all just made up to make white people feel bad, and none of this is right. Privilege is a hard concept for people to understand, because normally when we talk of privilege, we imagine immediate, unearned riches and tangible benefits for anyone who has it. But white privilege, and indeed all privilege, is actually more about the absence of inconvenience, the absence of an impediment or challenge, and as such, when you have it, you really don't notice it. But when it's absent, it affects everything you do. There are lots of types of privilege out there. The privilege of being born into a wealthy family versus a poor family is kind of obvious, but then there's the privilege of being able-bodied versus having or acquiring a disability that most of us take for granted. I have two very close friends who are wheelchair users, and I'll be honest, when I first met them, I was completely ignorant about the everyday ways their lives are made harder through no fault of their own. Some of these ways are simply thoughtless, but some of them are just the way we live, just the way we build infrastructure, just the way everything works, that just makes their life harder than mine. That's just one of the ways that I'm privileged, and understanding that, embracing that, doesn't make me a bad person. But ignoring it raises the chance that my friends will be excluded in ways that are not obvious to me, and as their friend, I can't allow that. There's a good chance, as a white person watching this, your life is already hard. Every day you have to overcome some difficulty or challenge just to get by. But you can still have white privilege. White privilege doesn't mean you haven't worked hard or you don't deserve the success you've had. It doesn't mean that your life isn't hard or that you've never suffered. It simply means that your skin color has not been the cause of your hardship or suffering. There is nothing but a benefit to understanding our own privileges, white and otherwise. It brings us closer to those who are different. It helps us be vigilant about the ways we treat others different than us. It helps us make a society that is fairer and more equal. Having white privilege doesn't make your life easy, but understanding it can help you realize why some people's lives are harder than they should be.
Oh, there we go. Next slide. So one of the big things which we have is underrepresentation in our sector. These kind of results came from a ARA and CILIP survey which came out in 2015, which was kind of trying to kind of look at the lack of diversity within our profession, which is always also a consideration when we kind of look into this work about who's doing the work within our kind of community. So kind of the population on average is 97%, 88% white within the sort of general population, and in the list population it is 97%. And I know that there are very few people of colour where I work in my particular library, and I'm probably sure it's the same for you in your library. So these are all considerations when we look at kind of like decolonising, is what does our staff makeup look like? Who are the people who are buying our collections? Who are the people who are designing our spaces? How accessible is that making it? And how representative are we of the community which we serve? I work in higher education, and in the UK, only 0.6% of the population of the UK professors are Black. So of the 19,000 professors in the UK, there are fewer than 150 who are Black. Over 14,000 of them are white men. 90 of them are Black male professionals, and 25 of them are female. So you can see how these kind of intersectionalities of gender, race play out. Sorry, that came from the Advanced HE report, which was published in The Guardian in 2018. So you can kind of see how it's really difficult to be representative within our sector. I'm going to do a little bit of history now, and kind of give you a bit of a timeline and some of the movements that you may associate with this. So the term decolonising was used probably first by Frantz Fanon in 1961, and then came into kind of popular use after the 1980s. It was used by French historians to describe physical decolonising, so actually the removal of military power from kind of colonies. What we think of as decolonising actually started in kind of 2014, 2013 in the States. Some of the most famous, infamous hashtags or kind of groups that you may have heard of and associate with decolonising would be Rhodes Must Fall, which was from South Africa. Why is my professor not Black? Rhodes Must Fall, Oxford. Why is my curriculum white? And then Black Lives Matter. So the Rhodes Must Fall movement started at the University of Cape Town, and it was basically to lead a movement to decolonise education across South Africa. The statue was removed, and during 2015, kind of that really captured a lot of kind of headlines and kind of really publicised the movement. It kind of inspired the Rhodes Must Fall in Oxford, which didn't come until slightly later. The Why is my professor not Black came in 2014, and it started from UCL, and they hosted a live panel discussion which you can still view now. It's available online, which was really, really interesting on kind of creating this pipeline as to why there is an attainment gap for Black students and they can't see themselves in kind of academic communities. So this kind of prompted the decolonising of the university as a whole. And then obviously we've had sort of reading list decolonising and kind of library collection decolonising as well. Obviously, we all know about Black Lives Matter. It was founded in 2013. I didn't actually know that. I didn't realise it was quite so early. And it was a response to the acquittal of the murderers of Trayvon Martin. And I think we probably all became more familiar with the group and the term after the murder of George Floyd in May 2020, which caused widespread protest and removal of statues, and unfolded all sorts of events, both in this country and in the States, to highlight kind of the systemic racism which occurs. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of a background to kind of some of the terms and some of the movements and where the kind of decolonizing kind of undercurrent came from. So I found this really great, well, I can't say I found it, a colleague of mine very kindly sent this to me, and I found it really, really useful. It's a project which has been put together by the Policy Exchange, and it provides kind of a historical record of what's happened within particular categories. So kind of about statue removal, name changes, things like Hackney Council have begun to kind of think more sensitively about when they're naming landmarks. So that is really useful if you're kind of interested in the history of things, and also corrections and apologies, I should say. So the Bank of England, Church of England, for their involvement, promotion and kind of association with slavery. So if you really want to kind of understand, a really good historical timeline of what's gone before, that is really, really useful as well. This is where I get into the nitty-gritty of it. So in a library context, what does decolonizing look like? So I'm kind of going to go through five, I've got 5 categories and one of them's duplicated. That was great. So yeah, 4 categories. I'm going to kind of discuss about what decolonizing looks like. It is going to have a mainly academic libraries focus, because obviously that's my experience, but some of them kind of are a little bit wider and can be considered in a wider thing. So publishing and research. Publishing is a difficult one in itself. There are lots of different barriers that people of colour face when they are publishing. It's predominantly cis white men. Similarly, like if anyone's ever been a children's author or a parent, you'll see that publishing is generally celebrities now writing children's books. So there's a real kind of barrier to who can publish. And then where are they published? Are they published by mainstream or by independent, small, specialist publishers? It all has a real bearing on this kind of circulation of knowledge. Also, in the research field, there's very little which is published in languages which aren't what we think of as colonial, so English, Spanish, French, probably sometimes Dutch. There's quite a lot of publishers in the Netherlands as well. A lot of academics from the global south can have things rejected because they don't have a writer who has English as their native or first language, and some of the publishers, this is not my words, feel that their English is not up to scratch. There was a really interesting talk at Calc last year by Thomas Maboe, who's an assistant professor, and he was kind of explaining some of the barriers that he and his colleagues had for dissemination of their work. They had to pay quite a lot of fees to have somebody else translate their articles and their research to get it into the top quality peer-reviewed journals. And also how some of the words that were used, there's kind of local nuance, and how can that be translated into another language? It loses some of its importance, its impact. So there's kind of those kind of inbred racist and colonialist ideas that still pervade a lot of publishing and research as well. We also have other cultures as well, which don't necessarily have the written word as their main form of circulating knowledge. There are cultures which have oral traditions. So there's a really big oral tradition in Ireland, Australia, Asia, specifically any country which has Buddhism as its religion. They believe in kind of passing on their knowledge and wisdom through the spoken word. Also Native Americans and First People in Canada, they also kind of have a lot of oral traditions and capturing that knowledge and disseminating that information, whether it be kind of like academic research or storytelling or kind of fables, that kind of stuff. It's just, you know, already there's a barrier to circulating that material. The second point I was going to talk about is cataloguing. Obviously, we all probably work in libraries and understand that there's a classification system, which kind of whichever you use. We have Library of Congress where I work, but I've also worked with Jury as well. There's a really great film which I will put a link to. It's called Changing the Subject, and it was a documentary about a group of students at Dartmouth who challenged the anti-immigrant language in the Library of Congress subject headings. I think the film is now freely available on the website. But they were kind of highlighting the use of terms which we find uncomfortable. So it was kind of like challenging the use of illegal immigrant and the connotations and negative connotations which that had, and kind of the colonial legacy which goes along with a lot of our kind of cataloguing requirements. Like if anyone's a cataloguer here, you know that the banding for Christianity is huge, and you've got loads of kind of different sections for all different types of Christianity. But then when you look at other more marginalized religions, the kind of room, if you like, that is given is really, really small. So there's no way to be descriptive, and it's as though it's already pointing to the fact that Christianity is the, you know, preferred religion. It takes up more importance than kind of native religions. So yeah, some libraries have done some really great work. Cambridge have done some really great work in this area. I would like you to point you to their website on kind of critical librarianship and decolonising. It's really good. They've got some great resources. They are able to use their own classification system, so they're able to make changes a lot easier than probably anyone else who works in an academic library can. We are kind of, I don't want to use the word a slave, but a slave to the cataloguing rules which we have to adhere to. And if you're kind of tied into these systems, it's really difficult to break out of those. And kind of how do you present that into a catalogue in a way that people can be aware of that. There is something called the anti-racist descriptors, which is a really useful resource which Cambridge have on their website, which you can download a PDF for, and it gives you some really, really useful metadata tags to include in your descriptions of when you're doing metadata, which are kind of culturally sensitive and anti-racist. For a collection like ours, the Ethnicity and Migration collection, that is something that hopefully we're going to look to do. We're also trying to find a way of adding kind of a section or a subject heading on our catalogue fields as to things that we purchase with our decolonising budget. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end as well. The third thing was collections, so what they are and who they represent. So how do we acquire our collections? I work at a university and we have a really stringent kind of policy on suppliers who we can use. They have to go through a very rigorous process before we can use a new supplier. So for us, it's very limiting as librarians to be able to find quite niche material. We obviously use most of the main suppliers, you know, like ProQuest for our ebook packages, and it can be really difficult to purchase individual items from small publishers. I've tried on several occasions and not always been successful in being able to actually get the items which I wish to. Again, our acquisitions policy, I work in higher education. We're really fortunate at Warwick that we have a collection development budget, and also we have a reading list budget. I would say the majority of our purchasing is driven by reading list requirements. which makes it quite difficult to have control over what is being purchased from a decolonising perspective. We have great relations with our departments, great work's being done within my institution. I know a lot of other institutions, probably more in the social sciences like history, English. There's been lots of projects to kind of decolonise reading lists within those areas. But ultimately, when I go and have conversations with academics, it's really difficult for me to speak with confidence about what should be on their reading list. I am not an expert in their area of study. My expert opinion is in librarianship. So sometimes I've come across negativity from academics when they feel that in some way I'm trying to influence what they put on their reading lists. What we've done at Warwick is to do an annual report for each of the departments, and within that we've put a section in for kind of diversity of sources, so looking at gender, birthplace, and ethnicity of author, just to try and give a flavour of the type of materials that they're actually including. We have a lot of people recommending their own books as well. Obviously they want to generate income, and you know, they're experts in their field and they have every right to use the materials that they wish to use, but we have had some departments where they have point blank refused to engage in the process. Maths, where they said that maths and stats, I should be more specific, that you know, they deal with facts and figures. There's no room for them to be biased in any way, shape or form. So we have had departments which haven't been on board. We've got lots of departments which really are on board. But kind of the feeling has been mixed as to what to do with reading lists. We do have a collection development budget, which we're very, very lucky to have. And we also have a set amount of money which is ring-fenced for decolonising purposes. I find it sometimes quite difficult that decolonising and diversifying are kind of lumped together in this kind of like weird little bubble. Diversifying is not decolonising. They're two very, very different things. I try where I can to kind of diversify the collections, but I can honestly say that I cannot decolonise my collections as thoroughly as I would like to, because of all the kind of red tape that we have working within this kind of sector. Another thing that I've come across when doing my research is it's really difficult for librarians to find the time to do the work, because the work takes a lot of time, a lot of concentration, and each individual institution places a different priority on this work. So I'm really lucky. We have a working group within our library where we can discuss these issues, kind of formulate plans, try out projects. But some institutions, it's kind of like just a single librarian's personal kind of time that is taken up to do that, which can often be disheartening, because you kind of come up against all these barriers, and you kind of, if it's only you that's interested in it, it can be very difficult to kind of carry that weight on your own. Working in HE, they are colonialist institutions, and you know, do perpetuate colonialist ideas. It can be really difficult to kind of do the work if it's only you in an institution which is colonialist in its outlook. Also, who buys the material also has a big impact on it. I spoke earlier about privilege and kind of these unconscious biases. Kevin Wilson from the LSE wrote an article this year, which is absolutely fabulous. If anyone hasn't read it yet, you should. And that really goes into detail about decolonising collections and some successes that he's had at the LSE. He highlights something called selection bias, which is, I can really relate to this point, is that someone highlights to you an area of the collection which is quote unquote week, you spend a lot of time developing that collection and possibly limiting the time focused on the collection as a whole. So there's kind of all these biases and things that you do, all with all these good intentions, think, okay, I'm going to focus on this, and then kind of other things get left out. Also in libraries, we have, you know, we're still waiting for our brand new library, which will be coming in between 3 and 5 years, kind of looking at the space as well as the library and decolonising that as well. So not just thinking about the library as a collection of books and information, but as a space. You know, students gravitate to the library massively, you know, in our library. So who designs the physical spaces, the digital spaces? I know we've just had an upgrade that I would say 99% of the people that I've met who've been doing our upgrades have been cis white men. Also, when we do user studies, so UX studies and panels, you know, are they reflective of the community? Making sure that when we're doing these kind of space rehauls and regeneration, or if you're lucky enough to have the funding for a new library, you think about kind of the community as a whole and decolonising the space. So making sure that if you're using student panels, that they're reflective of the whole community. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm going to move on quickly because I know that we're time poor. So I'm going to go through some practical steps about what I've done in my job as an academic support librarian to try and do my best to decolonise as much as I can. I hope the before didn't sound too pessimistic, but there are some barriers, but there's no reason not to do the work. You just need to be aware of them. So I try and promote open access where I can. This infographic kind of weirdly skews the world map, and it shows you where the main kind of points are from where we get our information from, so North America and then Europe. So trying to kind of look at open access, students always want peer-reviewed journals, but kind of trying to open their eyes and academics' eyes to the value of a wider reading list and including supplementary material, possibly from an open access source. There are some great individual open source platforms. Garada portal is the Indonesian national government's open access portal. Also, Japan has JStage, which is its own kind of repository for open access material, kind of looking at highlighting these kind of open access avenues where you can and if you can. Changes to collection development policies can sometimes be a little bit kind of above our pay grade. Auditing the collection is really, really useful. There are some tools which have already been designed. There's an app that you can do that with. We've tried to do quite a lot of auditing before and run into issues where reading lists kind of really skew the figures, and mainly kind of your larger cohort, so like economics, law, any of the business modules, kind of really skew our figures on what's being borrowed and why. It can be quite difficult to do that. We are doing a project, as I said, about reading lists and presenting that to academic departments as kind of a sort of standardizing it as part of our kind of offering. A lot of the time they didn't ask for it. We've worked mainly with English and history on decolonising some of their reading lists. They've got some really great student-led projects which we kind of support in the background. It would be very difficult to move away from classification system and descriptive terms, but there is some information about that. The app, I should say, is from Imperial College, and it's devised to assess the geographic distribution of journal authors, kind of socioeconomic statuses, which is useful. But again, it depends on your collections and what you're looking at. Doing a reading list collection is quite difficult because you're always going to get the favourites kind of in those lists. So it's difficult Collection development can sometimes be stuff that's fallen off a reading list. And if you don't have a great budget for collection development, it's difficult to see how representative that would be. So what do I do? Practical stuff that I do to try and decolonise my practice is to draw attention to diversity in our collections and perspectives at every opportunity where I can. I try and tell academics about the ethnicity and migration collection. We try and have modules come in, use the material within it. I do teaching, so information literacy teaching, which includes inductions and one-to-one teaching or module-specific teaching. I always try and use diverse sources when I'm doing simulated searches or in my examples, just so we don't end up using kind of like the top textbook for that particular module. I try and shy away from that. I try and use really diverse examples. When I'm speaking to new members of staff, I kind of discuss the reading list acquisition process, talk to them about kind of whether they're interested in decolonising or not. You know, if they're bringing, a lot of academics bring a reading list with them, I offer to kind of do a bit of have a look through it and maybe see if anything could be updated or widened. I find that academics are more receptive to this in their further reading than their kind of essential texts. I think that they kind of stick to what they know and feel comfortable teaching with. We also have a project at Warwick called the Library Associate Scheme, and that is like a panel of student volunteers who feed back on various different topics throughout the academic year. And there is always an ask from them to do something on decolonising in some shape or form. We're always led by what they want to do. We kind of take a step back and support them in what they want to do. This year we are giving them a budget of £5,000. They have access to social media, and we've got some promotional materials to get them and the wider community to spend this budget on what they would like to decolonise. So really with a decolonising flavour. We've done it before to some relative success. We did have quite a lot of researchers who kind of put in loads of kind of stuff that was for their research. We got a lot of the same people asking for stuff over and over again. So those are some of the pros and cons to what I've done at Warwick. I'm really conscious of time now. So the rest of the presentation is just highlighting good work and some places where you can kind of look for further support. LSE, as I said before, Kevin's article is really great if you haven't already read that. Goldsmiths, I've been to lots of really great events there pre-pandemic, and I'm sure there will be more in the future. Cambridge's website is brilliant. That's where I did most of my kind of learning. Again, they've got the really great attachments for the anti-racist descriptors, and their DMU have been quite active and provided a toolkit to researchers on how to decolonise reading lists. So DMU is great for reading lists. They've got lots of information there. Cambridge is great for collections and collection development. Again, LSE, great. And then Goldsmiths just do great kind of lots of different things. So people to look out for, names to look for. Jess Crilly, I'm not in any way paid to do this. I just found it really fascinating. There's a new book out, which has got lots of different chapters from loads and loads of different authors across loads of different sectors. Jess Crilly is actually the editor of this book, and it's called Narrative Expansions, Interpreting Decolonising in Academic Libraries. That's really useful if you are looking for a place to start. It's really accessible, and you don't have to have any previous knowledge to read all of the chapters. People you might want to follow on Twitter, Professor Kendra Andrew talks about racism, decolonising with a UK flavour. Jason Arday again writes on racism, decolonising. He's at Durham, formerly at Warwick. Great speaker if you ever get to see him live. And Elizabeth Charles has written extensively on this topic, and she works at Birkbeck. All of these people are available on socials. And they often circulate some really interesting events or pieces that have been published. Mailing lists have also been amazing for me for learning. There is a Jiskmail UK-focused decolonising list, which you can subscribe to. There's an international one as well. There's a hashtag on Twitter called Decolonising. And then also I got this book as well recently, which is really, really interesting. And it's called This is the Canon, Decolonise Your Bookshelves in 50 Books. If you're looking for ways to kind of understand what decolonising looks like and best practice, the introduction is really interesting. It's no holds barred. It kind of gives you a really practical overview of what decolonising looks like and gives you some interesting suggestions of books. They are mainly fiction books, I will say, that you could include in a collection of leisure reading or such like. So I spoke about sources. There are some great bookshops in the UK who are independent, which if you are able to, please try and purchase from them. The Al-Siki bookshop is Middle Eastern and Arabic language books based in Paddington, and is very, very popular due to their stock of books which are generally banned in the Middle East. The Feminist Library has a large collection of women's liberation movements, and it also has an amazing feminist bookshop. So if you're looking for kind of intersectional stuff, that's always a great place to have a look. New Beacon Books, which is in North London, specialises in African, Caribbean, African American literature, and it was the first Black specialist bookshop. And they've been open since 1966. Shalimar Books is again in London, in Kennington, and is the leading supplier of Indian books. So, yep, African Books Collective is an online shop, but I think it has a shop in Oxford, and it has catalogues and publisher profiles to help you identify African works. So give them a look if you're looking for alternative suppliers. And I really felt like COVID really impacted on kind of decolonising. There were loads of kind of projects being done, lots of pre-pandemic conferences about decolonising, and then it all went very, very quiet. And I'm assuming that is because we all had a lot of other things on our mind. There are two things that I'd like to kind of highlight for you. Calc, I believe, is open for submissions, which is the Critical Approaches to Libraries conference. They always have a lot of things on decolonising there. I know that there's a wide range of topics that they discuss, but that would be worth giving a look if you can. And then there is a decolonising event, which is an online event through Wesline, which is, I think, early March. And that's some real practical projects, which kind of detail what they've done. I think there are two different speakers from two different universities. So yeah, give that a look if you can. Hopefully COVID now we all don't have to wear face masks for those in the UK next week. COVID doesn't matter. Hopefully there will be some more events and people speaking about what they've done. We are at Warwick trying to kind of get back out there and continue the work. And then I'm going to finish with a final slide about unlearning. I found this whole process of kind of learning about decolonising and thinking about how it impacts on my practice, how I deliver my teaching. And it's about unlearning. We're all on a journey. Every time I read a new paper, I learn something different, and it impacts how I then continue my work, and how I deliver my sessions, how I think about what I purchase, how I purchase things. So there is no wrong answer. We're all on a journey. We're all just at a different point on the journey. And I just think this quote's brilliant. Unlearning is how you keep up as the world evolves. So yeah, that's all I had to say. And I know that there are loads of questions in the chat. I'm going to have a look and see if there are anything specific. Otherwise, I'll go to the Padlet.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Kat, very much for that talk. It was incredibly interesting. I'm sure everyone else thought so as well, and particularly interesting to see the practical steps that you've taken yourself in your work. And thank you to all attendees as well. There's been some great sort of sharing of resources and case studies in the chat that I've been looking at as well. So for anyone who hasn't been keeping an eye on the chat, I would recommend to scroll up just to see what's been going on. I think most of the questions have been put on the Padlet instead. So I don't know if you want to have a look there and just pick the ones that might be. Yeah, it's a bit overwhelming, but
I don't know if I've got time for all that. Okay. Someone said, I guess we need to decolonise our faculty to ensure essential readings are comfortably decolonised and not just relegated to further readings. I totally agree. We have some great academics who are on board, but they're not always that way. Let's have a little look. Are there different approaches to be taken for a different discipline? I would say absolutely. I think we had most resistance from maths and stats, where they basically point blank said there could be no racism because it's maths and stats. A lot of the student-led things that we have put together have come from English, modern languages, and history. We have a couple of kind of slavery modules, and we have the new head of history who is an expert on kind of slavery as well. So there's kind of a lot of already well-informed people in that area. Someone said, hi, I struggle with decolonising versus diversifying in relation to reading lists and curriculum. I think depending on your institution, they could kind of put them together. A lot of people kind of lump it into that EDI. If we cover all these things, you know, we can just stick a sticker on it and we've done that job. Tick, next. I think it is sometimes difficult to explain to academics and or upper echelons of library management that, you know, it isn't just a tick box exercise, that it's something that should be dedicated into everybody's job, you know, having a conversation across all levels of the library, not just the people who buy the books, about the spaces, about how people interact in the spaces, the kind of events that you hold, those kind of things is really, really important. Do I have any tips on opposing resistance to the cost workload involved in decolonising collections? Find other people in the university who are doing the work. There'll be other people in other departments who value what you're doing, collaborate with them, share stats, try and get in on other projects which are taking place, try and see if there are any student-led initiatives going on. I always find that people's ears peak up when you use the word co-creation. So if you can find student groups to support in that would be great. I found that has gone a long way to getting more kudos, I guess, from senior managers, which can then apportion my time to it. So I'm just trying to pick a few, but there's so many. There are so many. Someone's put, how can we convince academics to diversify their readings in, oh, it's just popped down, in physics? I think just keep having the conversations. You know, we have to do an annual report, keep having those conversations, keep adding that material into it. And just keep having those conversations. I think if we kind of stop having the conversations, that's where the problem is. Yeah, I'm really conscious of time now. I could go on for like hours and hours with the Butler. I feel like we could have done a whole series just on this. But thank you so much, everybody, for today and for joining me and taking the time to do that. If anyone's got any questions after and wants to get in touch with me, I'll pop my email in the chat. I am by no means an expert in the field, as you've probably all gathered, but I'm just really passionate about it and you know, want to keep learning. So if anyone has got anything they would like to share with me, as in best practice or ideas on how to do what I'm doing better in a better decolonised way, I'm really interested to hear about it. So yeah, thank you for your time.